Joining me now is Douglas Murray, Associate Editor of The Spectator and the best-selling author of The War on the West. Let's start, Douglas, with the meaning of words. From women to racist to recession, words are being redefined. The US is in recession right now, but is it really a recession if we don't call it one?
That seems to be the message from the White House this week, that yes, if you don't call it a recession, then it isn't one. Now, previously, it's always been thought that if you have 2 quarters of negative GDP growth, then you're in recession. However, the White House doesn't like to say that. Joe Biden, it has to be said, did say the R word an awful lot of times in 2020 when Donald Trump was president. But now he's president, and there are 2 quarters of negative economic growth. That's not a recession. It's something else. Secretary Yellen also refuses to use the word, says she doesn't want to involve herself in semantic games. This was what she said. These are semantic games, whether or not you're in recession. And of course, it's not a semantic game at all. For American families and families across the developed world, it's not a small thing or a semantic game of any kind if the world's foremost economy is actually officially in recession. But yes, as I say, this is rather common of the left in recent years. We've had the redefinition of woman that you and I have spoken about before. We've had the redefinition of breastfeeding that's now chest feeding, according to the New York Times last week. We have all of these words that you can wish away reality so long as you've got control of the language. But as I say in the New York Post, the problem with that is that reality has a certain thing in its favor, which is that it can assert itself in the end awfully fast.
Well, I tell you though, we've had the Democrats' propaganda arm, big tech, and much of the media go into battle here and redefine recession. Wikipedia changed its definition and then locked its page so people couldn't change it back to the former definition. It's going to be interesting to see if at some point they admit reality, just like they had to do with inflation and acknowledge that was a real problem and not just transitory inflation. Now, we spoke last week about who is running US foreign policy. Is it the White House or is it China? After Beijing warned that the House of Reps Speaker Nancy Pelosi should not visit Taiwan. Well, she's on her way to the Indo-Pacific region, but in the statement her office released, Douglas, there was no mention of Taiwan. They mentioned South Korea, Japan, Singapore, Malaysia. Will she get to Taiwan?
It's an extraordinary moment, this, and it could turn out to be one of those inflection points of our century. You know, a very verbose spokesperson for the CCP in Beijing actually warned about Nancy Pelosi's plane being shot down if it were to go to Taiwan. I mean, this is really. We have to hope this is simply histrionics. But it shows you something remarkable that in this century, Beijing feels so powerful that it can actually allow its spokespeople to make lurid claims of threats against the Speaker of the House, against senior Americans. It is an extraordinary thing that such threats could be made, and I think a lot is going to ride on whether the Americans, take this in their stride, accept that this is the language of Beijing, or actually say, you don't have the right to threaten American officials. Taiwan is a sovereign country, and we'll visit it as much as we want. But it's a very telling corner that we're at the moment.
But what sort of a message will it send if she doesn't, in fact, touch down in Taiwan at some point during this Indo-Pacific visit?
Yeah, absolutely terrible, Rita, as you know. What a signal that would be of weakness. We have seen the Chinese threaten Western governments before. We had the Dalai Lama affair 10 years ago in the UK, where the Chinese Communist Party successfully intimidated the then British government. after a meeting with the Dalai Lama. There were endless apologies from then Prime Minister David Cameron and others. And basically trade with China only resumed, the trade talks only resumed after the formal apology had come from the British government. That's an incredibly embarrassing, humiliating session for my country of birth. But it's a quite different order of magnitude if the CCP can actually successfully bully, not Great Britain, but America. That would be a terrible sign of a real change of direction in global affairs.
Now, the Tavistock Gender Clinic will be closed down after a review found it was not safe for children. You warned about these very dangers in your best-selling book, The Madness of Crowds. Are we now going to see in the coming years these massive class action lawsuits over what was done to children there, confused children who have been given irreversible medical treatments, often with devastating lifelong consequences?
Yes, I said in that book, as you know, Rita, I said that every age does things that people look back on it and they think, what were they thinking? You know, every age in history is like that. And so in a way, one of the jobs of writers and thinkers and journalists should be to try to work out what those things are now and stop doing them fast. And I said in The Madness of Crowds, I'm pretty confident that one of the things that future generations will look back on this age with just amazement at is that, you know, children who weren't allowed to buy cigarettes or alcohol, who aren't allowed to get a tattoo, were being not just allowed, but encouraged into a pathway in which there was only one direction, and that was the direction of transitioning, that is, trying to approximate the opposite sex. And I interviewed people who'd been through this process at the Tavistock, you know, young people who did not who were not really given any guidance other than so-called affirmation. And I knew something was up at the Tavistock because there was an enormously swift staff turnover in the last decade or more. Now, when that sort of thing starts to happen, you can tell with medical professionals that they're starting to become uneasy. And then inevitably the whistleblowers emerged, and then the first court case. And now, thank goodness, there is a proper light on this. It's going to close. But I would hope that there will be now a formal judge-led inquiry into what happened. Because, you know, Rita, one of the oddities of our age, and we've spoken about this before, but it's worth dwelling on, is, you know, we pretend that we protect children and that we want to help them. And actually, it's not just unhelpful, but actively cruel to say to a child who is confused, and look, the world is confusing, and your teenage years, it's especially confusing. But to say, you know, if you feel a little bit left out or a bit strange in your body sometimes, and who doesn't feel strange in puberty, but if you feel a bit strange in your body, maybe you're of the opposite sex, and maybe you can just get those developing breasts lopped off. Or you know, we can do a double mastectomy on totally healthy young women and much more. You know, that is wicked. And the idea that such things were being encouraged and forced on young children is, as I say, something which I'm very confident future generations will look back with amazement at. But I hope that in this generation, there are going to be class action lawsuits and more coming down the road as fast as anything. Adults, it's one thing. You can make your own decisions as an adult. But as a child, what a wicked thing this was to allow to go on.
Well said. And finally, Douglas, you were walking on a London street, minding your own business, when confronted by this message, hey, straight white men, pass the power, it says. Now, you're not straight, so you're safe, keep all your power. But what does it say about our culture that we have normalised this type of racism? And in fact, it's often promoted as anti-racism, this sort of messaging.
Yeah. No, as I say, I mean, if you did it any other way, like, oi, black guys, hand over your rights, or oi, gays, give us the cash, people would say it's a hate crime. This was actually sponsored by some pathetic government-sponsored art network thing. It's created by a black woman from Marseille who's heavily subsidized by the British government to insult the British people. You won't be surprised to learn that she turns out to be a self-taught artist. But you can look at her website and see her enormously subtle other work. But yes, I was rather struck by this. I mean, first of all, the presumptuousness of it, the insultingness of it. But of course, as I say, what other play it any other way round, and who would permit it? But also this total fatuity, the fatuousness of the message. I mean, who is a straight white bloke meant to hand power to? I don't know. In Britain, Kemi Badenoch, a very successful black politician. Lord Mandelson, a gay, very privileged white man. Elton John, perhaps, should be given the power. Who knows?
Maybe what about the mayor? The mayor needs more power.
Absolutely. Sadiq Khan is not white. Maybe he should get more power. Maybe Christine Lagarde. She's a woman. Maybe all of the unemployed white men in Southwark in London who passed that sign should hand over their power to the head of the International Monetary Fund. That'll sort out the inequalities of our age. I mean, Liz Truss is quite likely to become the next Prime Minister of the UK. Are all of the unemployed straight white men in Southwark meant to hand over power to her? It's absolutely intolerable that this sort of thing goes on. It's very telling of our age. And as I say, this sort of nasty way in which we've accepted anti-white racism, anti-heterosexual bigotry, and basically misandry, that is just hatred of men. This has all seeped into our era. I just hope to God it's going to go and disappear soon.
Well, let's hope so, but I doubt that's going to be the case. Douglas Murray, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
It's a great pleasure as always. Thank you, Rita.